clarify what you mean, like it's the name of the protocol, the individual have multiple instances on the website. So we have a URL. Does that answer your question? A URL. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. Just one thing that we will say is these are the kind of things that we want to discuss in the working group. Our main goal today is to see if there's interest to discuss these things, to form a working group to discuss them. So, well, it's worth bringing it up. But what I'll answer is we can talk about it in a couple minutes, but do you think it is worthwhile to have a group of graphic? What will then say? And then that's no, and which is perfect. And just we're not going to answer that. We'll have to move. No,
if you could post it to the list, that would be great. We've been posting reviews, so.
Awesome. All right, we're 31. I'm going to go close the doors.
Yeah. Welcome to the Webtrans BOF at IETF 106. People could take their seats, that would be great. As you may know, the mailing list is webtransport@ietf.org. We'd encourage you to join. We have a Jabber room, Webtrans at jabber.ietf.org. And the chairs are myself, Bernard Aboba, and David Schinazi, sorry. The note well, hopefully you've seen this before. It's a reminder of IETF policies in effect on various topics. The IETF's patent policy is set forth in BCP 79. Please read it carefully. As a reminder, by participating in the IETF, you agree to follow IETF processes and policies and a bunch of other things here. Yeah.
And I also would like to highlight the code of conduct. If you haven't read it, the high order bit is be nice. If you don't know what that means, read it, and we will be enforcing it, but I don't expect it to be a problem.
And definitive information is in the documents listed below and other IETF BCPs. Okay, so about the agenda. A few things, we've talked about the note well. We should probably start distributing the blue sheets and get those going. We'd also like to have volunteers for note takers and Jabber scribe. Do we have a volunteer for, or volunteers for note takers? Colin Jennings, note taker, thank you. Do we have anybody else, note taker? Okay. How about a Jabber scribe? Somebody please to join the Jabber room. Okay, thank you. Okay. So on the agenda, we'll be talking a little bit about the context of this BOF, as well as bashing the agenda, which is what we're doing right now. We're going to start off with an overview of web transport, which Victor will do. We then have about 35 minutes for relevant drafts. We have 5 of those. And then we're going to have a general Q&A session of about 25 minutes. The goal is for us to get through the presentations. If we have time within each presentation, we'll take clarifying questions, but it is a little tight. So we've have this big Q&A session at the end where we'll take any question relating to the BOF. And then we'll have a pointer to a charter discussion. This is a non-working group forming BOF, so we're not going to get into a detailed discussion of a charter, but there is a charter discussion going on in the mailing list. And then we'll have a wrap-up and summary. So as I mentioned, the time management is fairly tight. We'll try to enforce it, and I will be giving roughly a 2-minute warning for presentations if we come close, and also cutting the mic. All right, so a little bit of context. As I mentioned, this is a non-working group forming BOF. The focus is on client-server protocols only, not APIs. We're assuming familiarity with some of the following RFCs. The original RFC for WebSockets, which is RFC 6455. For those of you who remember it, it uses the HTTP 1.1 upgrade mechanism to transition a TCP connection from HTTP to a WebSocket connection. And then RFC 8441, which is bootstrapping WebSockets from HTTP2, which uses the HTTP connect method as specified in RFC 7540. And that provides a tunnel on a single HTTP2 stream to carry data and is multiplexed with other streams. So that's the context that we're assuming here. And the big question is, what's next? What do we do next after given those two documents? We'll hear a proposal for a datagram transport that is only for background. It was already presented in the quick worker group and most likely will be handled there. So, but it's useful to just know about it. And then we're going to hear proposals in two categories. One is a set of two proposals for extending the HTTP connect method for HTTP2. We'll hear two of those. And then we'll hear proposals relating to something called the Web Transport Protocol Framework, which includes support for unidirectional and bidirectional streams, unreliable transport of datagrams using the datagram transport draft, and then potential operation over HTTP3 and then just over quick and some fallback considerations. So that's kind of framing what you're about to hear in the agenda today. All right, so I'm going to hand the mic over to Victor to do the overview of Web Transport.
Good afternoon. My name is Victor Vasiliev. I work for Google on QuickTime, and I'm about to explain what roughly Web Transport is and what problem we're trying to solve here. So, the problem we're trying to solve is the problem of bidirectional communication on the web. So there are many ways websites can communicate to servers and many APIs that accompany it. The bidirectional ones means that the messages can freely flow at any time in both ways. So for instance, the fetch API assumes request response and strictly enforces that, and server-side events assumes that or web push are focused on server pushing to client, but here we're talking about interactive sessions. So the original way we did it is using an API and protocol called WebSocket, which allows send messages in both directions. Then eventually, somewhere along the way, there was the RTC data channel, which is has more transport flexibility than WebSockets because WebSocket is TCP based, so it only allows you to do whatever TCP allows. RTC data channel are HTTP based, so they allow you to do partial or unreliable and unordered messages. But however, they're not solving our problem because they are designed for peer-to-peer use case. So there is a gap for reliable but unordered and unreliable unordered messages, communications that's for client-server context, and we intend to address that gap using Web Transport. So what is Web Transport? Web Transport is roughly it's not one protocol because we found that there are multiple protocols that people would want to use depending on context. But all of those protocols and APIs provide two main features. One is that they allow you to send streams and receive streams, and streams are, well, they're, if you're familiar with Quick, they're basically quick streams. They are in a lot of ways similar to things like WebSocket messages or HTTP messages or a lot of other contexts, in the sense that they're reliable, at least within the single stream and single stream received in order. They are arbitrary size, so you can send as many data on a single stream as you want, which is at least a property which is often desired, but in a lot of cases, we failed to achieve the WebSocket. And the extra addition is that the streams are assumed to be independent, i.e. a loss on packets with data in one stream does not block reading from either stream. And they're assumed to be cancelable in the sense that if you close a stream, you can stop retransmitting all of the data that you've already committed to the stream. The second feature provided by all Web Transport protocols are datagrams, and datagrams are roughly basically UDP. They are assumed to be at most MTU sized, and they're assumed to be completely unreliable. And I say when possible because we define some transport which do map on TCP where that's of course impossible. So what makes this interesting is that the web part, the part where we expose web transport to basically arbitrary JavaScript codes that runs on user, imposes us a lot of requirements, and a lot of the work, most of the work around those protocols is about satisfying those requirements. So number one, we need the encryption and authentication of TLS, so that's fairly straightforward. Number two, we need to make sure that there is a feedback-based congestion control, i.e. unlike with raw UDP sockets, you cannot overload the network with poorly behaving clients because we have no guarantees about client behavior. There is a requirement on origin check, and this is very important because on the web, you are assumed to enforce access through sending the origin of website, which initiates a connection. There's also requirements, it's web, it's important for a quick transport connection to not be able to just pretend it's a regular quick socket or TCP socket or UDP socket, so there's a defense against protocol attacks. And the last and the interesting is that we have to integrate with things like content security policy, so we want all resources to be identifiable using a URI. So why do we want this? There are roughly, the original pitch is WebSocket for UDP. A lot of people want something that works a lot like WebSocket, that has simplicity of WebSocket, but is not tied to TCP. And for years, we struggled to provide this because there was no really good way to provide with security properties, but also provide and reliability. And the other is WebSockets, but without head-of-line blocking. It's like I have multiple independent streams of messages and I want them to be independent. We've reached out, we've talked to a lot of people, and we believe a lot of them are interested. There is wide range. One of them is web game developers who are very interested in doing online multiplayer games. So a lot of interested for applications like remote desktop or cloud gaming, where where a user does something and it's sent to server and then you get picture back. And it's very important for that to have little lag, which is basically impossible with TCP. And web chat is an example of an application which is possible right now, but would work much better if you have independence. So there are roughly 4 transports proposed, and they can be split across 2 axes. This first axis is really simple. It's whether it's based on QUIC or based on TCP, and as we all know, QUIC is often blocked in networks, so we almost always need a TCP-based fallback. And the second axis is more interesting. There are transports which provide dedicated, very raw level connections, and there are higher level transport which provide pooled connections by using HTTP session pooling. So that axis is roughly exists because I've talked to many end users, and there are roughly 2 cases. Well, there are people who want most fine-grained control over transport, and those are the people who care about real-time, or people who care about having as little dependencies as possible. And HTTP-free transport is more optimal because, one, it allows you to cut all of the handshake latency, all of the slow start latency, and it in general has all of the nice properties of HTTP, like routing and naming. The second axis is QUIC versus TCP, and we have roughly 2 proposals. One is, I've not written it out, it's called fallback transport, and the idea is that you can write something that looks like QUIC connection, but is sent over WebSocket. So it is completely polyfillable in JavaScript. Web developers would just be able to use it today because it's just based on existing web APIs. Second, for HTTP-free, the most natural fallback is HTTP2 because they're intended to be semantically equivalent. So that's basically the short summary of what we're going to talk about today and what's the proposed scope of work is. With the Q&A or?
Yeah, we have time for about 2 minutes of clarifying questions.
Any clarifying questions on anything I've said so far?
Colin Jennings, just a trivial question. Do you have on your requirement slide, do you have a requirement as well for MTU discovery, given the datagrams are MTU sized?
That's a good question. I need to clarify that, but
Okay.
basically in API we're required to be able to give MTU, but that's more detailed. And we're required to MTU to be maintained across COPS for HTTP when you proxy it.
Tommy Pauly, Apple. So the question before you got to this slide that I would have asked is okay, how are we doing this fallback transport because TCP is not equivalent to Quick because you're not going to get the multi-streaming. So this makes sense. So my clarifying question is, you say it's based on WebSocket. In what ways is it more than WebSocket? And can we call it something like WebSocket transport? So it's obvious
an
what it is, not
application
just fallback?
It looks like Quick, so it has multiple streams, whereas WebSocket doesn't have multi-streaming, it's one stream.
But WebSocket has message delineation and framing
Yes.
in it, which is the key difference from just a TCP stream.
Yeah.
And so I assume you're just using those messages.
Yeah, I had
to indicate
stream
the
ID.
streams.
and,
Exactly.
Stream machine.
Okay.
On top. Yeah.
Maybe we should work on the name to be
Yeah,
WebSocket
we could
transport.
do that. Yeah, I agree.
Jonathan Lennox. So a number of the use cases you had also have requirements on low latency congestion control, which would require something a different congestion control than the standard bulk transfer for Quick. Have you looked at that at all, and how would that be?
The
handled?
short answer is on server you can do whatever you want. Because whatever your code you put, your Quick library allows you. So you have controls, as you do with TCP or UDP or anything. You control your server, you control your operating system. On client, it is a more interesting topic and roughly with data. Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. We have an open issue on GitHub. You're welcome to read what we've discussed so far.
Eric Scorla, can you scroll back, I think, 1 slide or 2? The chart. Yeah, there you go. Fantastic. Sorry.
The chart?
Yeah, this one. Right. As I is it required that we standardize all of these?
For fallback transfer, it's not actually required with standardized. It would be nice.
I mean, I guess so. Supposing I'm with the opinion that HTTP is everything, and then I'm going to do stuff on the right.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing to understand what the proposal is.
The proposal is standardize. The top ones require standardization, basically. Okay, so the right one requires standardization because we extend the IETF standard.
Okay.
That requires. The top left one requires basically code point assignment, and it requires some protocol, which would be implemented both by browsers and servers. So the standard would be really, it's there to make sure we have arrived to something interoperable.
Okay. At some point in the future, it would be interesting for me to understand why you think Quick transport is needed, but perhaps not now.
Okay.
Might I suggest bringing this question back after the presentation on Quick Transport, which might
Sure.
clarify
I, mean,
that.
I have read it, but yes.
Right. I think we should cut the mic and go on to the next presentation.
All right, that's better. Howdy. So if anybody was in Quick this morning, you have seen all of these slides, and we will make it very, very fast so we can get on to the next one that you haven't already seen. So in talking about an unreliable data extension to Quick, we're looking at kind of that bottom section of what happens when we need unreliable data transmission. And we've got lots of applications that want to do reliable control streams and unreliable flows. List of use cases here, Victor's list of use cases earlier. There's a lot more. I hope nobody's offended if they're not in that list right now. So Quick is giving you a opportunity that we are using for the extension mechanism with Quick, where we would like to be able to have our reliable data be transmitted alongside our unreliable data. And we'd like to take advantage of the congestion controller and all of the other things in Quick, like the ability to negotiate things via transport parameters, the ability to have our unreliable data be ACT, even if it's not retransmitted. We'd like to use the handshake in the authentication context. And you're also very, very likely to already have a Quick connection up, especially if you're negotiating something. So in the standard use case where you bring up a control stream, you negotiate the use of some particular data channel that you're going to send, and then you send unreliable data over that channel. In this case, instead of having to do another handshake to bring up that channel, you simply open, or not open, but you simply start sending datagrams alongside your existing connection that has all your reliable data. It looks like this. It's a frame. It's one of the more simple frames you could ever do. You say it's a datagram, and then you put stuff in it. It has a length that is optional. If you'd like to have a length there, you can pack it in with other frames in a packet. If you don't have a length, it extends to the end of the packet. That's exceptionally useful if you are tunneling something over this. And we negotiate it with a transport parameter that also helps give you hints as to things like MTU and how big your datagram should be. They're ACK-eliciting. They are not retransmitted. They do not contribute to flow control. We got lots of really good feedback about this in Quick this morning, so we will have more discussions about that. If you'd like to talk, we'd love to chat. There's no more flow ID, although that is now in David's draft for H3 datagram. And one of the comments that comes up here is that many of the potential uses of datagrams have a very, very similar concept of flow ID. And people seem to be pretty split as to whether that's something that each application should define how that works, or if you should have a common one since they all have it and you'd like to be able to run maybe more than one thing at the same time, which seems pretty sensible, but we'll get there. We've got a bunch of people who are supporting this right now, and since we put these slides up, we've got a couple more, so that's even fun because it's not that hard to add support for a new frame type that you stick stuff in. And we had some nice interop during the hackathon. So that brings us to the end of datagrams. The idea here being that we will have a way within Quick to send unreliable data that is multiplexed alongside reliable stuff, which is kind of where web transport needs a building block.
Any clarifying questions?
And to repeat a quick point, since someone asked offline, the current plan is for this extension to live in the Quick working group. We're just having Eric kindly give this presentation to give people context that weren't here this morning. It's a race.
Tommy Pauly, Apple. So this is not a question really for you as much as for the use of web transport of this. So we'll have a flow ID in the H3 layer, but not necessarily in the raw Quick layer. Will we be talking about that later about, like, is that one of the modifications that we'll have in Quick transport?
Well, I think Victor will talk about the session ID and HTTP3 transport.
Okay.
And we'll also have a presentation on Quick transport. So hopefully that will cover.
So that should address like the use of flow IDs here. Great.
I think so. Yeah.
Corey Fairhurst being very brief, but I mean, are we expecting to multiplex different types of traffic together, as in the web sockets and other traffic? Because I have concerns about the flow, how the flow control might spin out in that direction, and that might be something for Quick to look at.
Yes, we should talk.
Okay. Next presentation, you can do that one.
All right, we made it in under 5 minutes. Let's do it again. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past in both TSVWG and in HTTP Biz, but this is kind of the, how do we do multiplexed byte streams over HTTP2? So we want to have a generic way to transport on a single kind of on-the-wire transport connection, secure multiplex byte streams that can be either unidirectional or bidirectional. We'd like to have already done all the handshakes we need so that we have a low setup cost for new streams. We'd like to be able to share a single congestion and recovery context for getting these reliable streams to the other side. One of the use cases that comes up, and we'll add to this list a little bit later, is peer-to-peer communication if you're doing something like remote IPC, or really any other time where you need to have multiplexing of multiple streams of data where you'd like them to be bundled together as a group. And we'd like to be able to do that while we share the underlying transport with existing infrastructure that actually like gets across the internet. So HB2 is a great candidate for this because it gives you a way to exchange and negotiate things. It gives you multiplex streams. It gives you that same shared recovery state. It gives you flow control. It gives you stream relationships. And it also happens to work on the internet, which is kind of a nice benefit. And of course, some of these properties and a lot of the fact that it's secure, et cetera, is coming from TLS, and the reliability coming from TCP, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole point is H2 taken as a transport provides a lot of these functionalities that aren't actually specific to HTTP itself, that have nothing to do with a particular request for a resource and a response to that. So we've had a couple of different ways that we've solved this. We've talked about adding new frame types. The 0.0 version of the draft actually added a new frame type, which you could use bidirectionally. Based on some of the conversations that we had since then, we moved on to extending the connect handshake. So we basically use connect to connect through a remote endpoint to somebody else. And then the WebSocket over H2 RFC allows extending that connect to actually connect to a particular protocol token that's on the server. And we can use the headers that go along with that connect request to add additional negotiation of like, what are we going to be talking here? And so we want to be able to do the same thing where we have traditional HTTP request response streams on this connection, and on the same connection I've already got to somebody, I can say this other stream is for X, and then we can talk X over that stream alongside. And in some versions of this document, we've had tunneling of messages or datagrams with additional framing, or you can punt that out and treat it as a separate thing negotiated in a very similar manner, which is what we've done in the latest versions of the draft to keep things a little more focused. So basically, Extended Connect as it is today defines WebSocket and has a bunch of other headers that are very specific to WebSockets. So pretty much what we're saying here is we'd like to define a new protocol value, which is byte stream, and say you don't really have to send all these WebSocket specific things because this is going to be generic, not WebSockets. So you can not do the parts that you previously had to do. And so we say here, if you specify byte stream, you must have already negotiated some way of knowing what is going to be on that byte stream. But the suggestion there is that you can specify your own protocol token there the same way WebSocket does to say, this is what I'm going to be speaking over this stream, which is where some of these other things that Victor's going to talk about come in. So we talked about how we could do this for some remote IPC stuff. This also is interesting when it comes to things like Quick, because HTTP3 over Quick can fall back to HTTP2 over TLS TCP. So to Victor's question of what happens when Quick is blocked, what happens when you're not doing H3, but you're actually just using Quick, the transport parts of Quick, when that's blocked, and how do you get the equivalent thing over TCP? So H2 gives you a lot of the same things that Quick, the transport, does. Can we use that alongside? So the only thing that we're missing here is we define a new setting that says we can now do this extended connect handshake bidirectionally, the same way that Quick can initiate a stream from either endpoint of the connection. So in summary, we go through, we add some new protocol values, we strip down the extended connect handshake, and we allow you to do it in two directions. The key here where I think this fits into web transports is we're looking to multiplex multiple things over a single connection. We need to have some mechanism for negotiating what the use is of that stream. What are you going to be talking on this? Byte stream is minimally useful for the use cases that we happen to have where we already know what the other guy is going to be talking because we've already done that out of band. But if you're doing this in a more generic way, you'd really like to be able to negotiate that. And we need to be able to do this bidirectionally, which means we need to be able to traverse intermediaries in both directions. So you need some way to, when the traditional server is saying, I'd like to open a stream to a client, you need some way to know which potential client you want that to go to. And it'd be real nice if this could be extended to support unreliable delivery and datagrams, although unreliable delivery when you're running over TLS and TCP is a little bit harder. But at the very least, datagrams and messages are very useful concepts that we're looking for out of this general space.
Any clarifying questions? Yeah.
Roberto Ping on Facebook. I am curious why we're thinking it's okay to not say what the protocol is that we're tunneling. It's just a string, and it could definitely be very useful. And if this is a crazy question, just say crazy. We'll talk about it later. But in the past, when I worked on load balancers, knowing what kind of thing was tunneling could allow it to do demultiplexing and or reordering in ways that were very helpful. So the lack of that could be interesting. Anyway, there you go. Thanks.
That would be totally reasonable to put in there. This is a legacy because the use case that we were actually shipped for this does not need that because it's already negotiated out of band and there's only one particular value there. So for us, it's a useless token because we're not picking between anything. But to use this more generically, I think we do.
Okay, I think we'll move to the next presentation.
Hello, everyone. Next, I will present HTTP extension for message use case. Alan and I are from Facebook, and we already published this on this internet draft. So different from web browsing, messaging require bidirectional communication. So basically, client need to send a message to server and get a acknowledge. And server sometimes also needed to send a request down to client and get a response. So we are not the first one to build this bidirectional communication solution on top of HTTP. There's many existing solutions. We categorize layer to two major groups. So first one is string tunneling. Second one is server push. In the next, I will talking about why they are not good enough for messenger use case. When we say string tunneling, so basically client establish a HTTP string to server. After that, this string is used as a tunnel. Based on the way of the use this string, there's many internet standard. One is long polling, another one is WebSocket, and third one is Eric just talking about changing the string semantic to byte string. So once this tunnel ready, server can initiate a communication to client via this tunnel. So I wanted to it's worthwhile to point out this string, it's used as a law socket. So basically, we are use HTTP protocol, application protocol as a transport protocol here. That means client and server has to speak some protocol, application protocol over this tunnel. So there's some limitation for this kind of approach. So first one, it introduces the extra complexity. So basically the data needed to go through multiple layers framing. For example, you have to go to application layer, WebSocket layer, and HTTP2 layer. And it will be at a multiple head on top of it and make it less efficient on the wire. Besides that, we force the web developer to design their own protocol on top of this tunnel. More important, actually, by sending all the message within one single string, we actually defeat many optimization introduced by HTTP2 and HTTP3. For example, if we sending all the message on one string, we reintroduce the head of line blocking in HTTP3 case. And also because we send all the message use data frame, so we bypass header compression. Since we only have one string now, and of course we bypass the string prioritization. And some control message, for example, go away, it becomes less effective because there's no clear boundary with one string. So then the natural question, what about HTTP2 push, server push? So server push is best ever optimization to reduce the content delivery latency from server to client. So let's take a look at how it works together. So we assume there's a social data string. It's already established from client, proxy, and the server. Now server wanted to send a message to client. It will be refer this is open a social string and send it down to client. Because this is the best ever, and this message may not make to the client, and it's not a reliable communication for messenger. So this lack of acknowledgement make it unsuitable for our use case. So what do we do? What do we do in the proposal? It's we make a associated string more generic. We call loading string in the draft. As its name implies, this string is only used for loading purpose. We also introduce a new frame called extended header. It's very similar to regular HTTP H2 headers. The only two difference, once this header can be sent by Etherpeer to open an extended string. And it also needed to refer open string for loading purpose. So let's take a look at how it works. Assume the loading string is already established. Server client can initiate an extended string by sending out the extended header. Proxy will be used this referred loading string to make a loading decision, and finally it will be loaded to the server. Then we get a response from the server. So server can do this too. So basically he open extended string with extended header and get a response from client. With this bidirectional communication, we can use HTTP2 for message use case. So here it's more things about how this can use to traverse medias. So let's assume we already have this loading string ready from client 1 to client 2. And if server want to send a message to client 1, he just need to refer this loading string. He can do this one for client 2. And we also can use this one for, basically this is also can used for grouping strings. Let's assume we have this loading string, and all the extend string refers to this loading string. We go to server 1 and server 2. So the cool part is we don't need to, all the extended string don't need to carry about any headers for loading purpose. So the most close work with us is the web transport over HTTP3, and it will be presented by Victor in next. Here I want to give a head-to-head comparison between our extension and web transport over stream. So first it's loading stream versus web transport session. So they are very similar, and both is used for loading purpose, and both used to group dependent streams. Extended stream versus web transport stream. This is very similar. They can create by Etherpeer, and less loading. It's really dependent on loading string or session ID. It cannot independent loaded. But we have some fundamental difference. It's how do we model the message, the data exchange between client and server. Our proposal is to try to model the data exchanged as a HTTP message. So basically, when I say HTTP message, it's a structured metadata plus data. In web transport over HTTP3, they model this data as a string of bytes. So we believe for HTTP message, it's a better abstraction, and it's a richer building block, and it's more friendly for end users. So, okay, I will stop here.
Clarifying questions?
Roberto Peon. I'm going to ask this to make sure we're all on the same page, that a quick description of this could be that we are saying that we have a bunch of HTTP messages and we want to make sure that they are all routed to the same final destination, correct? Okay, thank you very much.
Relaying for Chris Lemons. Do I correctly understand that every proxy between the client and server must support these extended streams for them to operate?
Yes, it's needed to be worked in end-to-end, yes.
Okay, we'll go to the next presentation. Thank you. Victor?
Hello again. Now that I've outlined before what web transport is, and now that I want to go over two particular protocols proposed, and one of them is called Quick Transport, and another is called HTTP Free Transport. So Quick Transport is basically the idea is it's like WebSocket but for quick. And unlike WebSockets, the design principle I've adopted was we're going to take Quick and extend it as minimally as possible. That is, we will not add features and make it as easy to implement and understand for people who already know what Quick is. So what are the extensions that we do have to add? And turns out there are basically 3 things you need to add for Quick to allow your JavaScript to initiate quick connections. One is you need to make sure that the connections initiated from the web do not appear like regular connections, and we use a TLS ALPN mechanism for this. We're defining ALPN value to make sure that it's WQ as opposed to, for example, H3, which is HTTP free value, and the browser enforces that. The second is that the client, the server has to know what was the origin of the web page which initiated the connection. And in order to do this, we have a dedicated stream, which we call client indication, which I'll go later. The third is we need a URI. Since this is not HTTP, we need a new URI scheme. So client indication is just how we tell what the origin is. It is a simple key value tuple that's sent on stream 2. We define only 2 keys. One is origin, in which you specify origin encoded as defined as RFC. The second is the path, and the path, I mentioned the URL. So the Quick Transport has very simple URI schema. It's you have the host name. The host name is what you connect to, and it's sent as a part of SNI. That's how the server knows what the host name is. You have the port number to which you connect, and there is the path and the query component, which are all sent as a part of that stream too. It's well, it's that simple. Okay, so here is a worked example of everything that happens. Example.com tries to connect to server.test on port 50,000 using the URI specified there. The browser sends client hello and makes sure the ALPN is WQ. The server replies with ALPN WQ, at which point the browser knows that the server, in fact, wants to talk to a web client as opposed to just random quick client. On step 4, the browser now can sense the origin in the path component, and it senses in the stream, after which the browser basically can allow the client to send whatever client data wants, whatever data client wants. At step 5, the server receives the origin, at which it has 2 options, either to accept the origin or to just tear down the connection with appropriate error code. After this handshake happened, the connection basically is not different from regular quick connection. You can open quick streams and they are directly mapped to the streams you have, and you can send datagrams. And the datagrams are just like the client can call send datagram, and whatever client sends, it sends there. So that is the overview. That's the entirety of Quick Transport Protocol. HTTP Free Transport is approximately that simple, except here it's since it's over HTTP3, the problems like URI and origin are solved for us because we can send origin using headers and we send URI in headers, and we can just use HTTP URI. So what HTTP3 transport is it gives you effectively a logical something that looks like a quick connection, i.e. it's a collection of streams where you can send and receive streams in both directions and you can send datagrams. But it's inside the existing HTTP3 connection. HTTP3 connection, a single session can be, a single HTTP3 connection can have as many HTTP3 sessions as the server allows because they're all multiplexed. So the way you establish that connection, it's very similar to the concept of the routing stream in the previous proposal, is that you use extended connect to send the request to establish a session. If the server accepts, it gives you an ID, which is uniquely scoped to that connection. And once you have that ID, you can create streams on both sides by using a special, in the draft, I define a special frame. And you say, this belongs to an HTTP3 transport. This is the ID of that transport. And the rest of the stream or the rest of the datagram is whatever the application wants. Note that as written currently, the proposal does not imply any higher level semantics like headers or anything you would use in HTTP, so it's mostly using HTTP as a channel. So similar to quick transport, I have the worked example for this. It's like this time you use an HTTP URL and it sends a connect request with predefined parameters. It also since it uses extended connect, it also defines a custom protocol header. And for everything else, it reuses existing HTTP mechanisms. So that's basically it.
Yeah, so we can take some clarifying questions on Victor's two presentations, quick transport and HTTP3 transport, and then we can go into the general Q&A. So any clarifying questions relating to the two presentations Victor just gave?
Hi, Lucas Pardew, Cloudflare. So I was reading the specification for HTTP3 transport. And as you've got here, you say that you require the extended connect method.
Yeah.
I just wanted to double check my understanding in H2, that is enabled via a H2 setting, but in H3, this is done via a quick transport parameter.
I think that's the way I've written. It was written because I wanted to make sure that around the time you enable it, you also enable server-initiated bidirectional streams, because HTTP by default requires you to set that flow control to 0 and disable it. That might not have been a good decision. It's a detail that we need to sort out. That's one of the details we do need to sort out. But yeah, it can be made identical to how it's enabled in HTTP2.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
I just wanted to check my understanding, because what that is completely allowed. Like, you don't need to have only a setting as a way to do modifications to the protocol, but it's something that's a bit new. So yeah, let's definitely discuss that in the future.
Yeah, this is definitely something I'm not sure I might have opened an issue about it on GitHub. If not, we should open it and discuss.
Hello, Tommy Pauly, Apple. So H3 transport makes sense. Can we go back to the quick one? Yeah. So yeah, or let's look at the URI one. That's the next one. That's fun. So could you clarify a bit, like what we're thinking, like for the interpretation of like the path in this case? Is the path meaning? What is the what do you imagine it?
The path is whatever semantics application assigns to it. So the URL is like we could define a schema without a path, but we've talked with people who tried to use it, and they said it would be like really convenient for them to have some indication on handshake levels that they can use.
Right. It just feels like if our URI namespace is weird, it's quick transport. It's pretty open-ended, and it feels like it'd be good to specify what it means beyond just kind of like a black hole of what I'm going to get. Because if I'm connecting to a generic server, I would like to have some kind of an understanding of what this is being.
Well, so
what this
the problem I
indicates.
was trying to solve with Path in particular is, so when you use Quick, you could use ALPN to multiplex multiple applications on a single server.
Sure.
But since here we use ALPN for our security purposes, we needed to provide some replacement mechanism.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
so then in that regard, like it could be kind of like the interior application, and that's the thing that you're indicating.
Yeah.
But maybe spelling that out, that is how this is to be used, would help, because looking at this, if you're coming at it from another perspective, like, is this path at all related to a normal HTTP URI path? Like, is this the location of a resource that you're trying to access, or the protocol you're trying to use? And those are very different things.
Tommy, could I ask you to please send that to the list or file an issue on the GitHub just to make sure
I'll
we
file
don't
an issue
forget?
on GitHub.
Awesome. Thank you.
Rebecca Paone. With my past using or being associated with some of the creation of WebSockets, I can say that the lack of multiplexing there really sucked. And it resulted in a slow deployment landscape, and it also resulted in a bunch of interesting restrictions from the JavaScript and the browser API surface because of security and DOS restrictions or concerns, especially about killing origins. So my question is, have we forgotten this pain? And do we think we have a solution to it here? So that URI, for instance, makes me very afraid if we're going to offer that a level of flexibility from the JavaScript surface because of denial of service and similar concerns. The similar API surface from H2 or H3 leaves me much less scared because we're offering a very different threat model via those things. So another way to say all this is, like, what threat models are we considering with the exposure of the surface here? Thanks.
Yeah, actually, that might be good to file as an issue as well. Thank you.
Yeah, this is like, if you have any specific threats in mind you want to discuss, please do indicate the file an issue or send an email to mailing list, because we do need to think through those.
Seth Gentle, just a quick clarifying question. I'm curious what the status of talking to the web folks about adding APIs is.
Okay, so the status to this webfox, there is an API draft that is currently being incubated in WICG. We at some point intend to advance it further W3C tracks, but currently we're not ready. It's related to our implementation effort so far is we have been working on quick transport, and we have the protocol code is already implemented. So there is a simple toy server which will echo streams back if you ask. On the API surface, there's a little bit more integration, but we'd hope to have a demo prototype people can play with eventually. With HTTP free transport, we're a little bit less ahead, mostly because I want to get there to try to unify the semantics of H3 transport with other H2 based proposals, and to understand what actually should happen there. And at that point, we would see how we go around implementing that.
Cool. Thanks.
Mike Bishop, Akamai. Couple observations, particularly around the URL here. Since this is going for parity with WebSockets, and WebSockets is targeted at a particular resource and not at the origin as a whole. So if you want to have a similar API, you have to have a resource. But this actually inverts an order that you get in regular HTTP. Because in HTTP, and the client says, I want this resource, and I would like to do WebSockets with it. And the server gives it a thumbs up, thumbs down on that order of requests. Here, you go to the server and say, I would like to do WebSockets with you. Server gives a thumbs up or thumbs down, and then the client tells it what resource it wants. Which you've now, if nothing else, you're disclosing at the connect time that there is something on the server that will accept a WebSocket connection, which might be a probing concern. But I don't know. I don't know how that impacts the security surface, but it seems like you're losing the ability for the server to look at the whole request at once before it makes a decision, and you're just separating it into two separate decisions.
I mean, what do you mean before making a decision?
So, well, with HTTP, the server can see both.
Oh, decision to disclose that this supports quick
Yes.
transport.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is largely because, yeah, so when I said it's like WebSockets, there are lots of things which we try to not copy from WebSockets, mostly because we try to go for minimalism. Like, for instance, WebSockets, despite not being set in RFC, will automatically send you cookies. And we don't do that, just because.
Mike, same question. Please file an issue.
Tommy again. So kind of bouncing off of what Mike was saying here, that inversion of semantics has implications on the fallback if your fallback is to WebSockets, because now you essentially have different guarantees and you're accessing different things, because WebSocket does allow you to specify something off of a particular HTTP path, and this doesn't let you do that. And so they're really not equivalent for fallback. So we should figure out a way to reconcile that.
Understood.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's in the draft, which I have not read, I'm sorry. But when the server accepts the origin, can you go into a little more detail on how it does that?
It accepts the origin by accepting the stream. It reads the data from stream. Until it reads the data and finishes reading the data, it will not process any data. And as soon as it processes the data, it has option to send either connection flows or to hand it off to application.
Okay, so acceptance is really not killing it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's...
So
the reason we did not add an explicit OK is because otherwise you would get a round trip penalty because you would have to wait for acknowledgement from server. So that would add an extra round trip to the entire handshake.
we're now going to move into the general Q&A. No, you can come back, in which you can ask any question you want, clarifying questions, other questions. It's kind of open mic for another roughly 15 minutes.
Ian Sweat, Google. On this particular issue, I think this is an interesting topic. I had one detailed question. Is there a reason in Quick not to put this in as transport params, and then you don't have to use stream 2, and then by the time the handshake completes, you know that it works? Just seems like it's a transactional. I mean, that's a very quick sort of thing to do. Anyway, maybe there's a reason, but...
Oh, that was actually the original design, but it turns out the main problem with transfer params is the client transfer params are not encrypted. And we want privacy for both of those.
So this gets back, I think, to the question I was asking earlier, which is I don't quite understand what the rationale is for quick transport as opposed to HTTP3 transport. I understand it's like less clunky, but having one thing is less clunky than having two things. Can someone like me up? Is there a technical way in which this is dramatically better, or is it merely like I don't want to absorb all the HTTP machinery?
So the feedback we heard by some developers to the W3C API was that they wanted something very, very lightweight on that, like especially for game developers on that game server, so they could have their web server for the game where you do HTTP, and then when you connect to that, you can go up to the mic or get in line to answer comment on that, Victor.
Okay. Well, we can debate that later, but that strikes me as extraordinarily unpersuasive.
Other reason is notably when you pull things, you now end up in a situation where all of your connection, you're an HTTP3 connection, and HTTP connection is shared between multiple entities, which are across security boundary for each other. So for example, I can't add method like, give me the stats for this connection because that will reveal information. I can't even do things like give me the ID of the stream because that would reveal information about other traffic, which is privilege boundary separated by this. That's one of the problems we ran into as we were thinking this through.
That sounds like entirely a problem in your implementation, not a protocol problem. these are equivalent wire protocols. So like if you want to separate different trust domains across different connections, you can. Anyway, like we can take this doesn't impact the way I do this group, but like the TBD.
Martin Thompson, one of the problems that we've identified here this week in talking about this is how these things are identified. And so one of the kind of core problems with WebSockets was the way that it ultimately ended up integrating with Fetch, because that defines how it integrates with things like CSP and all the other sort of web tech stuffs. And while WebSockets ostensibly has its own URI scheme, in practice, we decided to effectively erase that when it came to talking about things like connect source and all this sorts of other mechanisms. So understanding how this fits into that ecosystem is going to be a critical part of this work. I don't think it's going to happen here as much, but we're going to have to be aware of it, and we're going to have to coordinate fairly closely on these things. So I just wanted to point that out. I don't think that stops us from starting work like this, but I did get a sense from the previous conversation that that's going to interact with quick transport in particular.
Can you file an issue for that, Martin?
I will do so. I've been typing it up as we speak. The other thing that concerns me here is that this discussion...
or can I answer that before? Just one quick point is that, like you say, I think that getting really to the bottom of this will be a W3C question. What we really need to get right is the interface between what we're building at the IETF and the W3C. The current interface is a URI. Maybe that's good enough, maybe not. And so that, if it's not, that's clearly what we need to get to the bottom of. But if we say that if we have an intuition that the URI is good enough, but we need to get right what the URI means, then that's a really conversation, but we need to have it at the W3C just to make sure we define the scope of this BOF as opposed to what would happen currently in the web incubation group at the W3C.
I was going to expand further on that because I think Roberto's point earlier about multiplexing and quick transport is one that we're going to have to deal with. And that has implications here. Victor's points are valid. We've got to work through that particular quagmire, and there are security-related decisions that we need to be making, and some of those security-related decisions will need to be made here when we make them. And this is just complicated, unfortunately, and there's no other way around it. We're going to have to deal with the fact that the W3C is there. We're going to have to also coordinate with what working group in order to get the fetch integration going. So this is, I'm just trying to give people an impression for the scope of the work here so that we understand where all the different pieces have to fit together.
Roberto Payon, I'm going to lead off with a comment that I don't want anybody to take any of these questions as a lack of enthusiasm. The whole reason I'm asking these questions is because I really want to see this succeed. So here goes. WebSockets was really, really painful. I said this before. WebSockets was really, really painful. And a lot of that pain came because the group of people who came together to ask for the requirements didn't understand the requirements. They thought they were asking for something simple, right? But simple to write and simple to operate are completely different things, right? And if anybody is thinking that they want something simple to write, you need to disabuse them of that notion as nicely as possible, because what they really want is simple to operate. Now, WebSockets was not that. There are practical considerations that we must all deal with, like server restarts, redirecting to other places, et cetera, that really suggest that we should consider the protocols that deal with multiplexing today are the ones that have dealt with most of those practical considerations. And I strongly suggest that we ignore anything but those protocols, whether it's HTTP or something else, I don't really care. But those practical considerations should dominate. Thanks, guys.
Hi, Brian Trammell, Google. Same questions that I'm going to ask here are indicative of enthusiasm. I think one of the things to reiterate, getting the interface right here is crucial at the beginning of this effort. I am not really sure. I have primarily looked at this from the IETF side of things. I'm not sure of the state of these interfaces in WhatWG. I'm not sure of the state of these interfaces in W3C. I don't know how fluid they are, or if this is basically W3C coming to us saying, hey, we have this interface, please give us an implementation of this. One of the things to what? It has no W3C status at all. Okay, that makes this both easier and harder. It makes it easier because we're not in a situation where we have to provide a service that has been already specified in a way that's wrong for implementation. It makes it a lot harder in that we're going to have some sort of process in this working group that is a tighter loop than any process that I am aware of that's ever run between the IETF and the W3C, and it's crucial to get that right. And I'm not sure how to make sure that happens, other than just make David go to both.
So to talk to that, one of the things that's important to understand is protocols last a lot longer than APIs.
Yep.
And there are problems in both the WebSocket protocol and in the WebSocket API. But I think we're envisaging that the feedback loop would go primarily from IETF to W3C. And a lot of the questions you're asking would be answered here.
Good.
Rather than creating this endless loop or a need for lots of liaisons and stuff like that.
And I'll add to that recognizing several people in the room here who were also at TPAC, the W3C in-person meeting last month. So I'm very optimistic that there's going to be enough cross-pollination that we can have this tight feedback loop. And I see our liaison to the W3C getting up. So if you don't mind letting Mark jump in.
Answer the question that I'm about to ask.
Mark Nottingham speaking as liaison from the IETF to W3C. This is being discussed in the W3C. It's being proposed there. It does not have any official status, but I would, without putting words in their mouths, say that from what I've seen, the W3C is pretty keen about this. So I would not take that lack of status as indicative of lack of interest. I think they probably want to make it happen, and they're waiting for us to some degree. So if we want this to happen, we shouldn't gate it on that. We can make the liaison work.
Yeah, thanks. And in a way, I think we've already started the feedback loop because we've been at the W3C, it's been presented there, and then they're saying, okay, they're same, not putting words in their mouth, but from the conversations I had there, people were saying, okay, let's do this. And then, okay, we turned around, okay, let's have a buff.
I would suggest in any future working group formation around this work that liaison relationship be made an explicit part of the process of the working group, whether that be as simple as, hey, at each meeting, we're going to have a readout of the liaison just to make sure that the health of that is
cool.
And
that is in our draft charter, which we will touch on a little bit at the end of this session.
I have one other comment. I'll flip around Bernhard's observation because I think both of these are true. Protocols last a lot longer than APIs, and APIs last a lot longer than protocols, right? So it kind of it depends on the environment that you're in. One of the things that I am seeing is bubbling up into the API of this is something that looks like a stack specification, right? So it's the same thing as ALPN is being used/abused for in Quick. It's like now we're talking about further up the stack. So it's like you have H3, web transport H3 Quick, web transport H2 TCP, web transport Quick. This is a recurring pattern, and it seems like we as the IETF probably need to get that right once, because doing it a whole bunch of different ways in a whole bunch of different places and then baking that into the interface, into the API, seems like a way to make mistakes that will hurt us for a long time. I don't know what the answer is other than to say, get a time machine and go to TAPS yesterday. You probably don't want something as heavyweight as that entire architecture, but there's a lot of thinking in the TAPS architecture document that might be informative to that discussion.
Lucas Pardew with an observation based on some of the earlier discussion around the TCP fallback stuff that we agreed probably needs some work, but looking at some of the other talks around quite broad extension of H2 or H3 and how that interacts with something like HTTP alt service in terms of detecting, a claim of being fully authoritative for that service and the alternative failing to provide the extension capabilities and how we might signal that and characterize the fallback behavior and how those things work. I don't know if anyone has an answer or how we get there, but it's something I think we might want to think about.
You know my answer to those. File an issue, please. But no, yes, thanks for saying that. This is a really interesting point that we do need to keep track of.
Eric Kinnear from Apple. I do want to reiterate that we are excited to work on some of this stuff, and I think we've already started some of the conversations, but we've seen from the conversations here that there's a lot of overlap in terms of what people's needs are, and we've already started conversing with some of the other presenters about how we could kind of combine those down into something that works for everybody.
Cullen James, I've been involved with another effort that had a high overlap with W3C, as several other people in this room. A serious mistake that I think we made on that in our liaisons and setting up with W3C is we did not come to agreement of whether the W3C could remove from our specifications things which the IETF felt were critical security features with absolutely no consideration or discussion with the IETF. And I would really oppose us moving forward on joint work with the W3C without having that very clear between us and the W3C before it started.
Just a question, Cullen. Are there any particular security things that you're majorly concerned about?
In this? Yeah. No. No, not at all. I just want to be clear on how we do that, and I suspect that it will be clear to everyone what are the security things we would care about. But I don't see big debate on that. I just see us needing to be clear on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the topic of W3C IETF joint work, I'm not sure either of those two, either the two most recent protocol / API co-development efforts like sort of worked out super well. Like WebSockets is kind of a cluster, and I think WebRTC, like I guess TBD, but it's like 27 years old, so like probably not like the biggest winner. Was your third one? Oh, Web Push. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think maybe some thought is required on some way I have not yet figured out to improve that situation. Because like I think like you end up with like the same like 70% of personal overlap in the same rooms, but then at least I think with I mean obviously I'm more of an ITF person than a WTC person, but I felt like that as things got more finished, enthusiasm on the IETF side for going to W3C and engaging kind of started to wane in all those efforts, and then you started to get a lot more disjunction between the two groups. So I think we should figure something out that didn't have that property.
Any other general Q&A? Okay. So the next item is just a pointer to the charter discussion. This isn't a working group forming BOF. So we're not going to get into it in a lot of detail. But there has been an ongoing discussion on the charter on the mailing list, and there is a draft charter available on GitHub. It's in David's repo. So if you have opinions on a potential charter, you can, of course, post to the WebTransport@IETF mailing list, or you can go to the repo and file issues and potential PRs. So I'm just going to show you where we are kind of on the charter, but since this isn't a working group forming BOF, we can't get into it too much. But just trying to whet your appetite so you can express your opinions on the mailing list or in the repo. So the basic idea is to focus on client-server protocols or protocol extensions that relate to the development of this W3C Web Transport API. And to provide support for reliable bidirectional and unidirectional communications, plus the datagrams that we talked about, and then origin checks. And there are three variants that are described here: protocol running over QUIC, which was the quick transport that Victor talked about; the one running over HTTP 3, which is the HTTP 3 transport; and then the fallback protocols. And then we do have some language about security issues from the above scenarios. Basically relating back to the design of WebSockets, so we don't introduce some new security issues or new ones. Don't reintroduce the old ones and don't create new ones. And then there's stuff about the coordination with the W3C, in on our side to develop an overview document. That's sort of what Victor talked about. Although from the comments here, we might want to also talk about operating kind of concerns as well in there. And then get feedback to try to have the best possible match. And as Ecker said, there have been a lot of issues with that. So maybe we want to be a little bit more specific about how it's supposed to work. And then there's coordination with other groups in the IETF. And then the milestones, which are kind of vague and probably not worth talking about here, although you're happy to comment on them. So that's the current state of the charter proposal. And please, if you have guidance for us, go to the mailing list or the GitHub repo and let us know what you think. Okay, yeah, if there are any little clarifying things, go ahead, Mitra.
Mia Kulevin. So one point that I'm trying to understand from AD point of view, from transport AD point of view, is like, what's actually implications for Quick here? Because initially the proposal was like very, very quick focus. You were proposing quick extensions and stuff, and then the proposal changed very, very drastically over the last week, basically. And like this looks very much, what was presented to me today looks very much like you're only using Quick, but there's actually no implications on Quick itself.
Yes, as far as we know, this is a use of the Quick Transport Protocol. This doesn't have any requirements on, well, I guess the only one that I see is we would need the datagram extension as part of Quick, but we're not levying any requirements on the Quick working group as far as we know, or on the HTTP working group. Though there'll be probably conversations there, but I don't think we're changing those protocols. We're just using them.
Mark Nottingham, what timing? Yes, this is mostly a transport show, but you are using HTTP. So just as I say in many places, keep an eye on things. For example, I noticed a new pseudo header go by there, and that's a fairly controversial thing, and we need to have a discussion about whether that's a good idea or not. Because I see implementations starting to use pseudo headers, and that goes to very nasty places very quickly.
And to, yeah, absolutely. And as stated in the charter, for any standards action would be discussed on the HTTP mailing list as well. And so especially something like this, we would bring there because, as you say, that's where all the experts are and where they have the opinions. Do we have any clarifying questions on the charter?
Any chance I could get you to change the name? Because it bites.
Go ahead and
specifically, it's neither a transport nor does it have anything to do with the web. So
the web API from the W3C has all to do with the web.
No, it doesn't. But browser API? Sure. You could call it the browser transport protocol, and I'd be perfectly fine with that.
This is the first time this week Roy and I have agreed. This is not a good name.
Okay. I wouldn't call a bike shed on the name a charter clarifying question, so let's not go down this path.
More a comment than a question, I think is what you're looking for.
So I think we're on to the next portion, which is wrap up and summary.
So we're not going to because the working group is non-forming, we're not going to make any binding calls, but we would like to have some, so the first two will be hums, and the third one will be a show of hands, just to gauge interest and to see if we think that this proposal is well-defined enough to warrant chartering soon, or if how much change is required before then, because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like there is interest from the community. So we're going to go with these questions. So first one is the web transport problem statement clear, well scoped, solvable, and useful to solve? I would like to ask for a hum. And first I will ask if you think yes, and then I will ask you to hum if you think no. Does anyone want to argue? Is this hum well understood?
Yes. Okay. So if you think yes to the question number 1, please hum now. If you think no, please hum now. Didn't hear much.
Can you guys call that for the minutes?
I think there was more for yes than no.
My general take was I heard from yes. If someone hum no, would you please kind of just state why you think no? Or which one of these points do you think is not necessarily true?
I say yes, maybe yes, yes. And I'm concerned about the maybe for well scoped. In particular, I think we might want to broaden the scope ever so slightly.
Can you like specifically add details and send this to the list as we're...
Absolutely, and I intend to have conversations before that happens as well.
Awesome, thanks. So I think for the minutes, mainly we're being a yes on this one.
Also just relaying 2 yeses on Jabber.
Thank you. Okay. The second question, are the web transport deliverables, so the overview, so as in the overview document, the quick transport protocol, the HTTP3 transport protocol, and the fallback transport, are those deliverables well-defined and well understood? Yes, Ted.
Ted Hardy, what do you want us to do if we think only some of them are well-defined and well understood?
That's...
On both times?
So, but if you if you think that's the case, can you say which ones you think, and then maybe we can kind of split this hum up?
Once again, Ted Hardy speaking just as an individual, I think the relationship between web transport, quick transport, and fallback transport needs some fleshing out. And perhaps a substantial amount of it before we can say that it's well-defined and well understood, because it's expected to go into deployment where there's a relationship among them that may be variable, and the suitability of the fallback transport in particular may be variable. And I thought you heard a little bit of that when people were talking about when you would fall back to standard WebSockets, and what your security properties were when you were falling back could be different from the security properties of what you got if you didn't have to fall back. And I think there's some chance here that we can get to deliverables which are well-defined and well understood. And so I'm not particularly fast about saying that once you write a charter and start doing the work, you won't be able to get there. I think you probably will, but I'm a little bit concerned about saying we're already there.
Ted, stay there. If we were to instead say, are they well-defined and well understood now, we were to say, are they well-defined enough to charter a working group to make sure those are well-defined? Would that be a better question? Would that help, or would that make things worse?
I think I'm going to defer to the rest of the line to answer that, if you don't mind. I'm not sure I have.
This is definitely a clarifying question. I understood this is a non-working group forming buff, and yet you're asking working group forming questions. So in what sense is this not a working group forming buff at this moment?
But in the sense,
in what way would a working group forming buff be different?
Yeah, I think the question here is to get a sense of the room on what portions of this charter need a lot more work, or what portions of the work items need more work to be clarified. So if you can speak to that, Ecker, like what portions of this do you think are less well-defined or less well understood?
Sure, but then you're like taking hums. So like again, I'd like to understand where's the AD
Well, we're not at the hum yet because we're trying to figure
No,
out
but you've
what
got hum on the first one, and presumably you're at the hum on the second one. So so once again, like in what ways is this different from working for your buff?
So our responsible AD, Barry, is coming up to the mic.
This is Barry. I don't think we went through charter bashing significantly. They wanted to show the charter to give you an idea of what they're looking at. But the question here on number 2 is not, is the charter we're proposing the right thing? It's these things that we talked about in these presentations. Do you understand them? Are they well defined? Is the technology we're trying to discuss well-defined and well understood.
Yeah, and if
Okay.
not, what portions are not?
Okay, but is like one possible outcome of this that the next thing we see is a draft charter and a proposal to form the working group with no subsequent BOF?
Not without some addressing the comments that we're hearing here.
Exactly. That would depend on what the discussion on the mailing list, how the discussion on the mailing list goes. It may be that after a bit of discussion on the mailing list, people decide that we're ready to start chartering a working group. That's not the goal of this BOF, but it could be a result of the mailing list discussion. We have chartered many working groups without having another BOF to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I mean, we got this offline, but like part of the signaling of it's not a working group forming BOF is the extent to which people are expected to come and are expected to weigh in the meeting. And so like if what you do is you run this and you like ask the home questions and you're like, this is awesome. And then you like work to the chart on the list and then you ask for working information. That is your working group forming BOF. And it's disingenuous to say it's not.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
So
So
to these
we're
specific
almost out of time. So if we can.
Sure.
probably
Well,
get
no, I
through-
want to respond to the questions as well. I'm unhappy that it was advertised in a working forming BOF and now it's being operated as if it were working forming BOF. So
okay, Eric, please let other people in line keep going. You've spent like 3 minutes at the line and we have 4 minutes left and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in line, please. Sorry.
We'll talk later, David.
Mia Kulevin. So my question might imply that I'm a no to the second question, but are you talking about the general, having these milestones without like taking what was presented today as a starting point? Or are you thinking about what was proposed today is clear and well scoped? Because at least what I understood from Mike Line is that there are a lot of things that need to potentially change or are very unclear. So the proposal itself is not well defined for me, but this could be deliverables.
Yeah, can you be more specific, please? That's what we're trying to get here. Which portions of this did you not understand?
So, I mean, like what you presented today is also a little bit more high level than what's in the drafts, right? So what you presented today makes sense to me, but like all the details in the draft, or not all of them, but a lot of the details in the draft needs much more discussion, I think.
I think this is a very big question, and I'm kind of surprised that HTTP2 transport is not on the list. But my main question is how this question is different from the first one.
Well, it's, I think, a question of really trying to elicit what needs more work or what is less defined, given the group feedback, what they feel, needs to be worked on a little bit more.
All right. Because it sounds just like the question is not really ready for the ham because that's what I'm done.
We're getting feedback that the second question is not, the question itself is not well defined, so we're not going to take the second hum.
Right. Tommy Polly Apple. So I think that's the right decision. And beyond that, I mean, specifically because we're saying deliverables here, I think that if you were to look at a charter with these deliverables, these are not the right granularity for deliverables. It's a bit putting the cart before the horse of this is one way of solving the problem, but we should state that we should solve these problems and not say we will create the quick transport and the fallback transport. That is a solution, but as we've discussed, we need to talk about that. And any charter should give room for a flexible solution that does not preconceive the answer.
Thank you.
Jonathan, similarly, I mean, to Ecker's point earlier that it's not clear that there should be separate quick transport and HTTP3 transports. I think that should be a decision made by the working group, not by the charter, whether there should be one protocol or two.
Thanks. All right, we're cutting the mic line for anyone that's not in line right now, and please be very brief. We're almost out of time.
Are we proceeding with hums? Chris Lemon suggests let's hum about what needs more work instead of humming about the whole list for adoption.
Yeah. So we're not going to have those hums today, as shown by the previous conversations.
Yeah, Martin Thompson, I hummed against the first one. What I learned here made me convinced that there's a bunch of things that we need to work on refining. To list those things as I see them right now, what are the problems that we're trying to solve concretely? We got close to that, but not quite. the nature of the relationship between the two standards organizations is going to be particularly difficult, and that needs to be mapped out very clearly. And the way in which these things are going to be identified and managed was also very unclear. I think some of the drafts that we're presenting on are extraordinarily unclear on those things as well.
Yep.
So we need to work on that as well.
Hi, Brian Trammell. Basically what Martin said, I would say that, you know, when this charter comes back for another BOF or, you know, discussion between, it should emphasize a bit more the overview and maybe say, hey, there will also be some transport documents, one per binding, because I'm not sure the split here is correct. I'm not sure that all of these are necessary. I'm not, like, the relationship among them for security is, and it's like, yeah, it's one proposal. There are alternate things to do in this space. There are alternate ways to manage a stack. I would focus first on getting something chartered that gets the overview out so that everybody understands what's going on, because otherwise the inter-SDO thing is going to be tricky.
Mark Nottingham. Yeah, I'd agree with what Brian just said. See, I can't agree with you. It's okay. I think we need to over communicate here. My concern around this is mostly around how complicated it is and how many moving parts there are. We have a history of over designing things and over engineering things, and you think we'd eventually learn from that, but somehow we never do. So let's define the problem set. Let's figure out how this is an evolution for WebSockets rather than maybe a brand new thing, and take it from there.
All right, so quick show of hands. So we're not going to take names, but just to get a sense, in this space and what we've discussed, if you are interested in like reviewing these documents, please raise your hand now. I'd say like 24 hands I'm seeing for the minutes. Okay, thank you. So to wrap up, because we're out of time, I'm getting a sense that people understand the general problem statement, the general space that we're working in. I'm also getting that there is interest from the community in working on these problems. However, we are not ready. We're going to need to make or put more energy into the charter because the current one is too specific and those specific items are not necessarily the right ones, but it really sounds like we have energy to go in this general direction. And Barry, if you have any closing comments.
I do. Go ahead, Mary.
Because I was also involved in making this a non-working group farming BOF. I think the discussion right now just like proved that that was maybe the right decision. And I would really encourage you to put not only more work in the charter, but put more work in the actual proposal you're making here for standardization.
Yes, that was part of what I was going to say. So I don't have to say that part. So the part I do want to do is quickly, raise your hand if you are on the Webtrans mailing list right now. And put your hands down. Raise your hand if you are going to join after this meeting. Okay, good. We got somewhere. So yes, focus on refining number one and getting that right on the mailing list before you think about redrafting the charter.
Awesome. We will see you all on the list very soon. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Well,